RG TV. Today we are live with SNP's MP of Aberdeen North, Kirsty Blackman. It's a privilege to have you, and it's a privilege for you to decide to join us. We really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward for a fruitful discussion.
It's really kind of you to ask me. I'll just put off that noise in the background. I shouldn't really have my phone beeping in the background. It's switched off now.
Okay, that's fine. So, for the sake of our viewers, we're here with Kirsty Blackman. She's an SNP, and that's a Scottish National Party. That's one of the largest parties in Scotland. That's the largest party in Scotland, yes. So, first of all, Kirsty, we'll be discussing Black Lives Matters, looking at the global situation we're facing now with COVID-19, then this police brutalization against black people. What would you say is the situation in Scotland?
So I think in Scotland, in some ways, we're incredibly lucky about the way that things have been managed, for example, with coronavirus. I think that the lockdown and the slow coming out of the lockdown has been really done on the basis of science. So I'm really pleased about the way that it was worked. I think the Scottish Government has done a great job there. I think seeing Nicola Sturgeon talking about this every day and keeping us updated on it has been really helpful for people. And I think the views that have been coming out are pretty clear. On Black Lives Matter, I think, thinking about the situation in Scotland, obviously we don't have as many people being killed by police officers as we're seeing in America, but it would be ridiculous of us to suggest that there's absolutely no problem with racism in Scotland, because there clearly is an issue here. There clearly is structural systemic bias in some of our systems that we have got in Scotland, because otherwise you would see Black people at the top of politics. You would see Black people at the top of many other careers that we currently don't see Black people at the top of. So there clearly is an issue in Scotland, and judging by my inbox, there is also an issue with not so much the systemic racism, but also the individual racism. There are people who have been targeted by individual racism as well. So it's not the case that we can just say this is something that happens somewhere else. It is the case that we need to look at ourselves too and improve our systems and our society so that it is a bit more sensible and less racist.
That's quite interesting. I've seen your post on social media, especially on Twitter. You were calling out people who have in any way been involved with any racism activity should get in touch with you. I want to know what inspired you to do that? Is it Kirsty Blackman as someone that loves humanity, or Kirsty Blackman as a politician? So,
I don't think you can separate those two things. I mean, the reason that I'm a politician is because, I left school wanting to help people. That is the reason that I came into this job. That's the reason that I do these things. But if you look at my Twitter feed, I've got things I was checking, and I've got something from December where I was asking about Britain's colonial history and to try and find resources that I could use to teach my kids about Britain's colonial history. I've been scathing about the empire in the past and harking back to the days of the empire. And, that's not to say in any way that I'm at all perfect and that I, necessarily make all of the right calls on these things. But I do feel like I've been standing on an anti-racist platform for some time now, and will continue to do that. Not just a non-racist platform, but an anti-racist platform, which I feel is a different thing, and it's where we all should be on this. But I certainly don't have all of the answers. I have not, experienced the levels of abuse and the levels of systemic bias against me as a white woman. I don't get that. I don't get hit by that discrimination that Black people get hit by. And it's really important for me, I think, to make sure that I listen to people, that folk are able to tell me their experiences, that I'm approachable enough, and that I've got enough ways that people can contact me, that they can tell me their experiences, so I can use the privilege of my platform to relay those experiences and to say, this is what needs changed in order for the system to work for everybody within our communities and not just those people who are white.
That's quite interesting. Recently, there was, I think on Saturday, there was a protest in Aberdeen. And I just want to get your view, what you think about the protests in all over the protests taking place all over the world. What do you think? Do you think this protest will go a long way to cause change?
So in the time of coronavirus, because we are in lockdown, and I don't think these protests should be happening. I would not encourage people to go along to these protests. I think it's dangerous for public health for people to go along. But I can absolutely understand why people do go along, and I'm not going to criticize those people that have made that choice, because I understand there's a massive, massive strength of feeling. I, in fact, took part in the Hysteria Aberdeen protest that took place last weekend. And during that protest, that was a socially distanced poster protest. So posters were put up and social distancing was observed during that. And I absolutely would not have taken part had social distancing not been in place. So with those caveats put in about the public health concerns that I have about it, I think it's really important that people do protest. I think it's really important that people make their voices heard. And I think it's really important that those of us who've got that platform, those of us who are able to make changes to the law as politicians, or those of us who are business leaders, for example, use the platforms that we've got to make sure that we are creating that change. And it's not good enough for us just to say that this week or next week or last week. You know, we actually need to carry that on. And I will be encouraging my colleagues and all of those who are working in Parliament to make sure that they're continuing to do that. I've got a surgery coming up at the end of the week, in fact 2 surgeries, specifically for Black constituents who can come to me and say what changes they would like to see made, because there's no point in me just deciding what I think should happen when I'm not the one that knows about this. I need to listen to people so that I can make the best suggestions that will actually make a difference to people's lives, rather than just coming up with what I think might be a good idea at the time.
Since you're doing well for us, for the Black community in your constituency, at what point can we say this protest or this fight against racism has been successful? What are the things we should look out for? What are the things we should look at to say, oh, okay, this fight against racism has been successful?
I think it's a really, really difficult thing to judge. It's the same as judging, gender equality. When is it the case that we have got full gender equality? Well, when you've got 50-50 split in, most of the kind of high-powered jobs. And I think probably you're thinking about looking at the same thing with making sure that you've got the right kind of percentage of politicians who are Black, the right percentage of politicians who are Muslim, the right percentage of politicians that are female, for example. I think once you've got those things, you can certainly say that there's a better measure of equality than there currently is. But it's stuff that's really, really difficult to measure. So, folk can say to me that they face discrimination, but how can we actually measure and quantify that? Well, probably the only way to say that we've really cured this, we've really got rid of racism in our society, is when folk are not coming to me saying that they've been met with racist slurs, or that if they are coming saying that they've been met with racist slurs or systemic bias against them, then action has been taken to ensure that those things are fixed, that that individual is punished if it's an individual that's done it, or that the system has been changed. So once people feel, I think, that they're no longer facing discrimination, then we can probably say that people are no longer facing discrimination. But we're a very, very long way from that, not just in the US, but here as well. Systemic change takes a long time to come about. And I really hope that people recognise that this does need to happen, that politicians continue to recognise that this does need to happen, and that we actually make that change, rather than just standing on a platform and speaking about it every few years when there happens to be protests.
We hope we get to that point. Recently, you asked the PM Boris Johnson about what he thinks about. No, let me just say specifically what you said. You asked him that does the U.S. President Donald Trump has many good qualities? You asked him if the U.S. President Donald Trump has many good qualities. And I wanted to know if you were okay with his response.
Well, I'm generally not okay with any of the responses that Boris Johnson gives to anything that I ask him. But the reason that I asked is because previously Boris Johnson said that Donald Trump has got many good qualities. And, you know, giving him the opportunity there to stand up and say, Black Lives Matter, the murder of George Floyd was absolutely horrendous, and that what has happened in America and the response that there has been since has been truly dreadful. But what Boris Johnson did was took the opportunity to stand up and say that America is a bastion of peace and freedom, I think were the words that he used. Now, people living in America who have been subject to rubber bullets, journalists who've been covering protests, who've been, you know, just doing their job and have been hit by rubber bullets, people who have been had their family members murdered by the police in America, or, you know, totally abused as a result of their skin color. None of them are going to say that America is a bastion of peace and freedom. We should be taking, if we've got this special relationship that is so often talked about between Britain and the US, we should be using that special relationship to say, things have gone too far, you need to sort yourselves out. We need to be that critical friend, if you like, if we've got that special relationship. And actually, Boris Johnson completely fails to take that opportunity. But I've got many, many issues with his views, not least the lack of apology that he's made for racist comments that he's made in the past. So I probably didn't really expect him to criticise Donald Trump too heavily on this one, unfortunately.
Yeah. So this question is a bit. Okay, let me just ask you. So, say a coronavirus overwhelming case by BIPOC, then will you say it's racist for government to have had a slow approach in tackling COVID-19 in favor of herd immunity?
So, thinking about this, I'm not sure at the point at which Boris Johnson was talking about herd immunity or was kind of relying on the herd immunity strategy that we knew enough about the virus to know the differential impact on white people compared to people of colour. I don't know if at that point when he was saying those things that we were aware of the fact that people of colour are more likely to be harder hit by this virus. But now we do. And if the government was trying to pursue any kind of herd immunity strategy now, then absolutely I would be concerned about the systemic bias that there would be in that policy, the fact that it would differentially impact different communities, and the fact that that would clearly be a racist bias within that. But to be fair to Boris Johnson and the Tories just now, it doesn't seem to be saying, they don't seem to be saying that they're pursuing herd immunity currently. But yes, I'm concerned, and I think, you know, the UK government needs to make clearer their analysis on the differential impact, their analysis on the fact that people are harder hit, and also needs to do more about talking about things like the air quality, because that was not in the report that they released. And I think there is, you know, potentially a link there between the fact that people of colour are more hit by coronavirus and they're also more susceptible to issues with air quality.
So there's been a lot of debates out there. Some say the Scottish government didn't go into lockdown sooner than England. Some say the Scottish government has the power to do that if it has to involve with health and education matters. And others are saying that the Scottish government has no power to go into lockdown. I wanted you to clarify that more for us.
So in terms of the devolution settlement, public health is devolved. So we've been able to take decisions around public health, but there are a lot of things that aren't devolved. And there is also the fact that we were trying to work on this four-nation approach. We were trying to make sure that the guidance that was put out was really clear for everybody across the UK. And, you know, that's why we had major concerns when the UK government decided to change stay at home to stay alert without even telling the Scottish government about that. And actually we've hit on a number of problems. So since things started to loosen differently in England to how they've loosened in Scotland, for example. We see people in Scotland not knowing which guidance to follow. So it is the case that even though some of this is devolved and some of this is the competency of the Scottish government, that if we had made different decisions on this because of the UK government's determination to stand up and talk as if they're talking on behalf of the whole UK and not just for England, it would have been very difficult for us to get people to stick to some of this stuff. And also we couldn't put in place things like quarantine, for example. We couldn't put in quarantine for people coming from abroad because we don't have the regulatory authority to be able to do those things. So there's some things we probably could have done, but there's a lot of things we couldn't have done. And we did do some things quicker. We did ban mass gatherings earlier, for example. There was clarity about our schools closing earlier than there was clarity about schools closing in England. But, you know, I think people will be picking this over for a very, very long time and looking at what was done wrong and what was done right. And it feels to me like people in Scotland, and looking at polling certainly, people in Scotland are trusting the Scottish government more than they're trusting the UK government to make decisions about public health.
So with this Black Lives or this racism issue, what do you think is the way forward? What is the equitable way forward to make sure that blacks or people with skin color are involved and they are happy, they are okay, there's no any complaint, everybody is moving on well, just as similar thing was done with advocacy for women and LGBT plus. What do you think is the way forward for Black people?
So I think politicians and those people making rules and laws need to listen to folk. I think that's the number one thing. We need to listen, and then we need to act. And it's not just about politicians doing that. It's about those people that head up public sector bodies, for example. So universities, health authorities, all of those places need to make sure that they are listening to folk and that they are making the changes that they're being asked for, and that they are stamping out any discrimination or any inherent bias that there is within those organisations. There's also, in Scotland, we've got the race equality framework that's been produced by the Scottish Government, and that race equality framework, just going to check the lady's name, give me a second. The race equality framework has Kaliana Lyle, who's in charge of that, and Kaliana Lyle has been put in place since 2016 in order to ensure that this framework is met. And this is a framework that's been put in place that will ensure that action is taken between 2016, when it was first published, and 2030. And that's about making sure that we go right down into communities and we ensure that racism is stamped out at a very community level, not a kind of top-down approach, but making sure that everybody's working within this framework to ensure that we get rid of racism in our communities. But, you know, I'm not going to suggest for 1 minute that this will be sorted in, you know, the next few weeks or even anytime very soon. But I think there is a political will to sort this more than there ever has been before. What we'll continue to do, what I'll continue to do as an MP, as well as listening to folk, is to do things around tackling the Home Office, for example. I think the Home Office has got a number of inherently racist policies around, for example, no recourse to public funds, which is an immigration status where people can't claim public funds, which overwhelmingly hits my Black constituents more than my my constituents who are white. And the same goes for visitor visas, for example. The number of people that I've had come to me say that their family members cannot come and visit because they cannot get a visitor visa. There's no right of appeal on visitor visas. But, you know, those constituents that come to me on that are overwhelmingly Black. And I think that these, again, are biased policies within the Home Office. So we'll keep fighting on places where we've been able to see that explicit bias or that explicit racism. But, you know, places where maybe I can't see it, we need to make sure that we listen to folk and we tackle those organisations and those individuals who are causing problems and who are making things more difficult.
That's good to me. So do you agree with the tearing down of statue of people that were involved in slave trade in the past?
Yes. I mean, just yes, I do. So I think that the way that it was done, you know, was pretty violent way that it was done. It was not a great idea to do it in the time of coronavirus when we've got public health issues that, you know, people shouldn't be that close to each other. But I can completely understand why folk did it. I mean, you know, they've been trying for years to get rid of this statue. They've been trying for years through democratic means and just got caught up in all this bureaucracy and all of this red tape all of the time. So I don't personally believe that statues are about remembering our history. I believe that statues are generally about glorifying somebody, about making that person, you know, making us all aware that that person was better than all of the rest of us. And we absolutely should not have people on those plinths that are folk that have been responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of people, personally responsible for that, you know, and that is horrendous. But, you know, generally anybody that has made their money from the slave trade, we should be recognizing the fact that that's where their money came from. That's why they had enough money to buy a statue and to make that statue happen. And they should not be glorified for that. They should be criticized. It should absolutely be remembered, though. You know, we need to do more to ensure that we are teaching about the history of these things. We need to do more about ensuring that we're teaching about the fact that Glasgow, you know, loads of the streets and places there were funded by money where the profits were generated because people had slaves. You know, we need to do more about making sure that we are aware of the shared history that we have, I suppose, the colonialism that happened, and take some responsibility for that. We can't just say it's somebody else that did this. No, it was our ancestors as well that took part in this. Those people that live in Scotland, people that lived here, you know, 150, 200 years ago, were people that were involved in the slave trade. Not everybody, obviously, but, you know, too many people. And so we need to be aware of that history, but I think you can be aware of that history and learn about it in schools, for example, or museums, without having statues glorifying those folk. That was a very long-winded yes.
Yeah. So I also understand that there are no black members in the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah, so and do you know what? That is crap. Honestly, it really is. And actually, there's hardly been any MSPs from black and ethnic minority communities at all. I understand that there's only been 4, and they've all been from the same area of Pakistan, which is pretty shocking, to be honest. You know, we need to make sure that we are doing more about this. And actually, you know, trying to work out how to do more about this is something that perhaps politicians have not been particularly good at. When I was younger, I was not in favour of quotas. I really didn't think that quotas were a brilliant idea for gender equality, for you know, ethnic diversity, for any of those things. But having seen what the Labour Party did with quotas and managed to massively increase the representation of women in their parliamentary groups, I have since I've seen that, you know, basically quotas are the only thing that works. I have been in favour of quotas, and I've been encouraging of the SNP to ensure that we've got quotas. And we've been doing a bit on this with, you know, we're not there yet, certainly by any means. And part of the issue, I'm not trying to make excuses, but the fact that we keep having snap general elections in Westminster means that we've not got as long a run in to be able to choose candidates, to be able to ensure that we're not just, you know, replacing the candidates with the same folk that were there before. We've not had as much of a run in on that. But, you know, we need to take responsibility. We need to stand up and say we haven't done well enough on this in the past, and we need to take positive action. And that's not just the SNP, that's all parties need to take positive action to ensure that our makeup of parliamentarians, or at least our makeup of candidates, better reflects Scotland's diversity, because currently it doesn't, and we need to hold our hands up, own that, and say, you know, we've been pretty rubbish at that. We need to improve.
So, personally, as Kirsty Blackman, what will you do to encourage Black Scottish to be involved to involve yourself more into politics, so that we can see enough of them in MSP?
Do you know what I think? I say this to everybody. Anybody that wants to be a politician, that's interested in becoming a politician, really the only way to do it, with a few a very few notable exceptions, is to join a political party. So I would suggest to anyone that's interested in it, go and speak to MSPs, go and speak to MPs, and I would suggest to my MSP and my MP colleagues, listen to folk, speak to them, answer their questions, give them the answers that they're looking for. If somebody comes to me and asks me, I've had various chats with people about what it's like to be an MP, how to get involved in it, how to get involved in party politics. And I'm generally happy to do that. And I would encourage my colleagues to do the same thing. And I would also encourage them to particularly do the same thing and make time where those people are folk from ethnic minorities, where those people are folk that don't look like the typical politician, if you like. So I come from a background where we didn't have a huge amount of money. I don't come from a background that I'm, pretty rich like some of the MPs are, particularly in the past. And I think it's incumbent upon me to go and speak to schools, to go and speak to young folk and say, look, politicians are not just 40, 50-year-old white men who've got bags of money that they inherited from daddy. There is a huge variety of us. I think it's incumbent upon us to do that, but it's really difficult for us to do that if we haven't broken that glass ceiling with regard to, there not being enough people of colour in there. We cannot send our people of colour from the MP and MSP crowd to go and speak to folk. And, it's quite hard to kind of break that glass ceiling. So what we're doing just now is, in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, we had a meeting last Monday where a number of SNP politicians, councillors, MSPs and MPs came together to listen to a huge number of people from the Black and ethnic minority communities who wanted to tell us what their experiences have been. And I think it's really important that we carry that on, that we carry on listening to folk, that we carry on looking at where our systems are biased against folk, and that we change the systems as well as mentoring and supporting individual people that want to get involved as well. I think, I can't speak highly enough about the idea of mentoring programs, and we've had some of those in the past, particularly aimed at women, because we've still got a gender balance issue as well. But I would like to see that carried on by a lot of different politicians, because I understand that not everybody supports the SNP. I mean, I can't understand why, but not everybody supports the SNP. So we need other parties to take that step as well and to make sure that they are building on those programs that they're beginning to have already as well.
Okay. Personally, I feel going through your Twitter feed, I realized that you one of the MPs that are really advocating for Black Lives Matters. You retweet a lot of Black Lives Matters activities on Twitter. So before this interview, I spoke to some of my colleagues, my friends. Most of them are blacks, and I told them, "Hey guys, I'll be speaking with Kirsty Blackman. What do you guys have to say?" So some of them say, "Okay, say this to Kirsty. Tell us sometimes in Aberdeen we sometimes face some racial activities." And I'm like, "What kind of racial activities are you talking about?" So some are minor, and some you might not consider it as an act of racism. For example, a black person will be coming from the other side of the road, and a white person will also be coming from that other side of the road. But the moment it gets closer to realize that the person coming is black, then it crosses to the other side. This was long before the COVID-19 issue. Yeah. So sometimes it kind of have an impact on some of us when we have that kind of experience. So I want to find out from you, what would you say to people that are in quotes racist in your community?
So one of the things that I think we should be doing is we should be making sure that we're teaching kids about accepting folk. And it's really important that we start with kids, because kids learn stuff from their parents, kids learn their parents' prejudices. And we need to make sure that we are educating kids at the youngest possible age that we're all different, but we all matter, and that we're all equal in that regard. We're all human beings. And I think it's really important that we do that in schools. And actually the stuff that my kids have been taught in their school, I think is really good. For adults who are taking this point of view, for adults who, do you know what, it's a really difficult thing to kind of say. For adults who are behaving like arseholes, I think they should just wise up. But it's difficult for me to say that. I can't say that to people. What I have done is, in terms of individual conversations, if I encounter somebody who has got racist views and they make those racist views known to me, I tell them that they are wrong. I explain to them how they are wrong. But I'm lucky enough to have this platform to be able to do that. I'm lucky enough to be able to, to be able to say that to folk, to have the confidence, I suppose, in myself that I can argue with people about that. So I wouldn't necessarily criticize people that don't stand up and do that. But what I would say is the more people in our community that can take that anti-racist platform, the less acceptable racist behaviour will be, and the less people will do that racist behaviour. So the more people that can use this, they can use their righteous anger against racism to actually take an anti-racist platform. To, if, let's say they're speaking to their next door neighbour and their next door neighbour says something that is racist in some way, they should be calling that out. I know it's difficult to do, right? But if they've got the energy to do that, they should absolutely be doing that. And then if folk realise that this is not acceptable, if folk realise that actually our society is calling for this racism and this bias to be removed, then I think that they will calm down a bit. But it's a really difficult one to solve. And, I don't necessarily have all the answers. And I'm well aware that I've kind of said to you, people need to come and speak to us, right? But, although I need to be aware of the problems, it shouldn't be entirely on the Black community to solve this. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
And it's the fault of the racists, and we need to make sure that we're solving this problem. So, do you know what? I probably don't have a very good answer to this, but if anybody else does, then if they can tell me, then I'll do my best to try and make it happen.
It does help. It does help. So before I involve Greg in, I just want you to, what do you have to say to the minority race out there? What do you have to say to your minority people living in Scotland, in Aberdeen to be precise? What kind of words of encouragement would you want to say to them?
What, if folk have come to live in Scotland from other places, whatever colour their skin is, I think that's brilliant. And I think, massive welcome to Scotland. Thank you very much for coming. We really need people to come and live and work, and I think our communities are better as a result. My kids go to school in classes that have got many more people from ethnic minorities than I had when I went to school in Aberdeen, and I think that is a massively good thing. The amount of different cultures and histories that my kids are exposed to, I think it's brilliant for them to learn so much about so many different cultures. I think that in Scotland, I know that there is bias, I know that there is racism, but I am proud of how welcoming the majority of our population are. I am proud of the fact that people, not everybody, but many people do try very hard. For example, numbers of Syrian refugees, for example, that we've had in Scotland has been very good. We've opened our doors to folk and encouraged them to come. So I think that is hugely positive. What I would say to folk is, look, if you do want us to change things, if there are changes that you need us to make, let us know what they are, and we'll do our very best to make those changes happen. If there are people or individuals or systems that need fixed, let us know what they are, and we'll try our very best. I can commit myself to listening to folk. I hope that other politicians will do the same. I understand that a number of them are doing the same in there. But, anybody who chooses to live and work in Scotland, whatever your skin colour, whatever your religion, wherever you were born, you're welcome to call yourself Scottish, and you're welcome to stay here and be part of our community, and thank you very much for doing so.